Today we're testing multiple claims that something weird is going on with Tarkov's armor and ballistics system. Many are reporting that things aren't working as expected, primarily with high pen ammo like 338 Lapua Magnum, M61 and even down to M80 as well. And given the issues we've had in the past, it certainly wouldn't be surprising if there were some problems that have emerged in 1.0 that are only coming to light now. Let's begin with this clip where Smoji hits a guy 2 times with Lapua AP and registers no damage whatsoever on the end screen. We then have other reports in the Twitter thread that I made with M61 versus a Karund and a headshot, showing tons of armor damage, M61 again into class 4, again with a ton of armor damage, 338 AP with more armor damage than on the body, and then Igolnik, which is the highest pen ammo for 545 with tons of armor damage as well. So something spooky is going on, in particular around armor damage, and we're going to investigate. Now, there was a particularly insightful post from Teratex, who I do respect in the community. He said, I spent a whole hour trying to figure out why Igolnik versus Timmy's was almost equal damage to armor as body. I think both damage and stats is either bugged right now, or there is something seriously wrong with damage reduction versus multi-layer armor on full pen. So the first port of call is the arm bug, and this was one of the historic multi-layer issues where shooting through an arm and then into an armor plate caused the bullet to effectively disappear after the armor damage had been dealt, not causing any damage at all to the player behind it. But on testing this, bizarrely, it works completely as expected. The bullet goes through the arm, it blacks the arm, the excess damage is distributed across the rest of the body. The bullet then continues out of the arm and on into the thorax, where it hits the front plate first, it pens, it goes through the soft armor over the thorax, and then hits the PMC's thorax for damage. I was using M61 here in the M700, so this is exactly as we expect. But when we get to the end screen, which you can get by just throwing a grenade to yourself, you can see some of the stats as to what happened in the offline PMC raid. So how is it possible to shoot 3 times, get 6 hits, one of them is a headshot, and deal 140 damage to armor with M61? This is already a little bit odd. Historically, I was aware that if you shot through an armor plate, then typically that would give you 2 hits, but I couldn't quite remember exactly what happened if you went through an arm first. And so we went to go and test this in isolation, and when we take a bullet that should pen through everything, and we fire it at the arm, it goes through the arm, through the chest, through the soft armor, and into the thorax. When we go and look at the endgame stats for this as well, it does show us that lo and behold, this does indeed give us 3 hits. So for one single shot, you can actually get 3 hits on an enemy PMC because it counts the arm, the front plate, and then the thorax as 3 separate zones. It's important to remember here that the front plate hitbox is actually completely separate from the PMC. It sits outside the PMC's hitbox itself. This will actually become important a bit later on for something else that we're going to talk about, so keep that in mind. But for now, we're going to go through to the damage screen, and the armor damage that we see here is really odd. So we've got 67 absorbed and 128 dealt to body. The PMC's body damage here does make sense because we have the entirety of the arm, we have the spillover damage as well, and then we also have the thorax on top of this. But the armor damage is a little bit weird because we penetrated straight through and there were no issues there at all. So to have 67 here is a bit strange. Fortunately, because I record all this stuff, I could go back and have a look at what the plates ended up at. So after the first shot, we had 29 out of 50 on the armor plate itself, and then 27 out of 34 on the soft armor behind it. So that gives 21 and then 7 armor damage. A naive approach basically just says 28. So that's clearly not what we see on the end screen. Then another idea that I had is that every piece of armor has a destructibility factor, which determines how much armor damage is actually done. So maybe if you scale it by this, then you get to that number, and that would take you to 40 and 37, and that gets you to 77. So that's also not correct. Now this bit doesn't really matter that much. We don't really care about calculating the exact figure, but it was bugging me a little bit. So I thought, why not let's just separate it out a bit. Let's go into another raid, let's test it without the plate at all and shoot through the soft armor and just see how much armor damage there is for the soft armor on its own. And then maybe that will give us some insights as to how the game's splitting it out. And I did that, and lo and behold, as you can see, there was no soft armor damage at all registered on the end screen, which is odd. So it means that all the armor damage must be coming from the front plate, but I don't know how BSG are calculating this number. Not that it really matters. So the first conclusion is that the armor damage on the end screen is just reporting way too high. This, for most bullets in the past, has reported near 0 if you go through and pen immediately. But at the moment, it's reporting damage absorbed as if it's caught the bullet when it really actually hasn't in reality. So I think this is the main takeaway for now, is that the armor damage that you see on the end screen doesn't reflect the penetration capabilities of the bullet that you're using. Even if you're using something like M61, a really high power cartridge, that will go straight through class 4, but you'll still get armor damage damage absorbed on the final screen. So something there is bugged. But what this doesn't explain is how we get 0 PMC HP, but with armor damage in certain situations, like we saw in the original clip from Smoji right at the start. Now, fortunately, those of you who've been following along over the last few years on Tarkov's Ballistics understand that the armor hitboxes are not necessarily the same as the PMC's hitboxes, and we talked about this a minute ago, and I said remember this for a bit later because this is where it becomes important. So if we stand our PMC in certain positions, you can actually hit that front plate hitbox without hitting the PMC at all. So what this means is that you can zero out a plate and not cause any damage to the enemy player. This is possible for any armor that follows the front plate or back plate style methodology, so any actual real plate itself, and also the soft armor on some of the plate carriers that have the armor that follows the plate. So for example, the Stitch Profi or the AACPC. There are lots of situations in which this can occur, either from the front. It's easier from the side, but it can happen from the front as well, as I'll show you in a few of the clips here. And when you get to the various end screens, you'll see either no PMC damage at all, or a small amount of blunt damage depending on which round you're using and whether you did actually get an absorption. If we slow down the original clip all the way, it is actually possible that we've managed to clip the front or back hitboxes of the player and only get armor damage and not PMC damage at all, despite the fact that we're using 338 Lapua. There is one other thing that I noticed that I want to talk about, but the main conclusions for the first section of the video is that firstly, ammo damaging armor is completely broken in the stat screen and it reports a lot more armor damage absorbed than it should versus anything that it's shown in the past. This is causing lots of players to think that their ammo isn't penetrating properly or it's being absorbed or something when it actually is, and this is leading people to believe that the system is broken when I actually don't think it is. I did lots of other tests with various different bits of ammo, and yes, there might be some things in RAID, either bits of desync and stuff like that, but all of the actual ammo testing that I did, everything worked exactly as I expected. The second part is that you can hit the edges of the plate hitbox and not cause any PMC damage, even if you're using a supremely high pen cartridge, because the damage hitboxes for the plates is not the same as the damage hitboxes for your PMC. This can then cause extremely high armor damage on the end screen because of issue number 1, where it's reporting damage absorbed even though it did actually penetrate. The final part, which I do think actually has some influence on this, is that there's just a lot more class 5 and class 6 out there at this point in the wipe than there usually would be. Firstly, because of drops, and secondly, because of the Christmas tree. People are getting class 5 armors in the drops, but people are also richer as well, so are further ahead in progress and are also more comfortable to be buying higher tier armors. The Christmas tree itself also allows players for 8 white baubles to create 2 level 6 plates, which means that you see class 6 all over the place way more than you normally would, even at the end of a regular wipe. Because of these 3 factors, I believe that players are thinking that things are an issue when stuff is actually not working badly under the hood, it's just the way that it's displayed. The final thing that I noticed whilst doing this testing, which is something that I have actually noticed previously, but I feel that people don't necessarily know this, and I went to go and test it properly, is that if you have a black thorax or a black head, you can actually be shot in another body part and have that zeroed without it killing you. The spillover damage only goes to body parts that are still alive. Now, I know that this will be a surprise to some people, because normally what happens if your thorax is on 1 and you get shot in your right arm, for example, with too much damage, that 1 damage that overflows into the thorax will actually kill you. But if the thorax is at 0, which normally happens from a bleed, then you can no longer die to a shot on another limb anymore, which is a little bit odd. In this clip here, I managed to get a bleed onto my PMC, and I left the other body parts to heal up to allow the thorax and the head to go black. And you can see here that no matter which body part you shoot afterwards, you don't end up dying to those shots. And you can even take this all the way down to just having 1 single limb remaining. Now, those of you who remember a long time ago, back to the days of Veritas and ballistic testing, there was a bug once upon a time where the damage overflow wouldn't work properly. So I did check for that as well, because at some point there was damage being disappeared off into black limbs, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Everything seems to work as we expect. And as a little recap, when you shoot somebody in the blacked arm, that will pass through 0.49% of the damage round to the rest of the body, so just over half actually. It's quite a big reduction. And then in the legs, it passes through 0.7 of the bullet's damage across the rest of the body. The very last caveat that I would say is that sometimes the end of raid stat screen doesn't show that particular raid and it shows another raid. This is very difficult to work out why this happens, so do be aware of that the end screen can't always be trusted. And then clearly there's also probably some other weird situations as well going on in the game that are almost notoriously impossible to test in offline because it's something to do with online networking or desync or something like that, which makes it very, very tricky. But hopefully today's video gave you a bit more insight into some of these specific issues that we've been seeing, and I do hope that BSG makes some improvements to the end of raid screen around armor damage, because I think that's doing a lot of the work to mislead people into thinking the system is broken. So as usual, a big shout out to all my patrons, and as always, have fun in your raids.